Look, thanks everybody for joining this, which is our first webinar from Pulse Intelligence. So really, really excited to talk through some of our learnings the last 2.5 years. Special thanks to Scott. It's not only in Australia, but it's midnight at the airport. So thank you so much for joining us. Scott has been instrumental in many, many aspects of especially the prompting, and we'll dive into that in a sec. So just to add a little bit of structure to this call, I thought we will share a very brief agenda just to quickly talk through it. Let me just get this up on my screen. Um, okay, so today, so this might be a bit difficult. I'm sorry, guys. I'm in a hotel as well, so I have two screens, so you might actually see some of these other bits and pieces on screen. Okay, so we're going to talk very briefly through who we are and just a little bit of context, just in 30 seconds each. One of the key areas that Scott will cover is the problems that you are currently living with, and go into a lot of detail there about what generic AI can and can't do. I will then go into really very practically what it takes to get to the data you can trust, a combination of all of our learning over the last couple of years. Scott will lead, and I will also add a little bit to the fourth section, why generic AI can't shortcut this, which is also critical to understand. We will go into a live demo. Scott will also facilitate that. We prepared a couple of quite deep prompts and quite deep automation examples. Scott will do it live, but we've also run them before, so we'll show you live how it processes it. But to save anything from 5 to 15 minutes, we'll just jump into the outcomes as well. And then we will share a checklist of key questions, 8 questions that we believe you should be able to ask or should ask any AI process or any LLM process, and then we'll open the floor for some Q&A. So yeah, without further ado, let's get going. All right. So very briefly, some of you might know me. I saw some of our clients are on here as well, or have at least registered. So I've worked in the mining industry 20 years. I have actually got a consulting background, worked extensively with the world's largest private equity funds in due diligence, as well as executive search and board assessment and recruiting, and have been building Pulse Intelligence for the last 2.5 years alongside some development clients, including some of the largest royalty companies, investment bank, private equity funds, all within mining. So yeah, we've got a great deal to share with you guys. Scott?
Hey guys, I've been involved in the industry for about 15 years. The last couple of years, I've opened up my own advisory firm called Kamoa Capital. We strategic advisors from anything from an exploration company to government. So advise on M&A, structuring, raising capital, investor relations, those types of things. So Pulse is a tool we currently use every day, and it's great working with Will as he builds out the product.
All right, thanks, Lovan. All right, so yeah, let's get straight into the meaty part. Scott, could you kick us off with the problems that
Yeah,
undoubtedly people are facing already, and that we try and solve?
yeah, cool. So I think everyone has probably tried their best and does it daily using ChatGPT or Claude to try and answer questions they might have in their minds, or they might trying to build prompt tables or things like that. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to the accuracy and can you trust the data that it's pulling from. And when you're actually pulling that data, what sources it's coming from, because when it comes back to you, you might not have the right hyperlinks, you might not have the right currencies. So it's it's instrumental to have the right data just sitting there. When you also ask the questions, it's very important to understand what validation processes it's going through. A normal LLM like Claude or ChatGPT, that there isn't any validation process kind of built into the background to check. And if you aren't building the correct prompts and the correct prompt structure, it's not going to really kind of checkbox all those validations. And then when you're working through studies like a PFS or a DFS, and you might upload the document, and it's a 100-page document, do you know it's actually reading line by line and the citations and everything like that? Um, if you're in a closed loop system, the data already exists in there, it's already been read. But if it's the first time reading it, there's so many nuances that it can pick up, and it's I've been in instances where you're going back and forth for hours trying to understand if it is the right outcome. And then I guess if you're putting in a very generic prompt to say, go search for the top 10 copper producers, do you know that it's going to the right sources? Do you know it might be actually checking an article that's a promotional article, and it might not be actually checking the exchange. So um, by having a closed loop system and the data already there, you know that it's actually sourcing from the right place. And some other key things are URLs. I've been in situations myself where you've gone to maybe check the citation or check the URL after it's gathered the data, but you hit a 404 page or something like that because websites actually change. So if you are trying to back it up in the boardroom or in a presentation, and you present that data to somebody, um, you're not basically going to look good because the data uh, endpoint has already changed. So by having that closed loop system, you can actually click through to where the data has come from. And just a timepiece, right? If you're constantly having to go back and forth to search for that data, you honestly are wasting your time because you end up being in a feedback loop where um, you start questioning yourself, and it's probably worth you just going through it line by line instead of having to prompt for hours and hours on end. So they're the kind of the real problems that if you're using a generic LLM, Claude, ChatGPT, you tend to find. And we will, and we will go into this soon, but why having a closed system or having the data already there in an MCP environment is the real key here. Well,
All right, Scott. Yeah, thanks for that. I think let me just add a little bit to that while before we move to the next section. So again, just for those that do not know, an MCP is basically called model context protocol. It is essentially a connector that connects data with Claude. So you might know the phrase API better. I mean, your weather on your Apple phone is an API, right? It draws the data, it sends it to you. An MCP is really a two-way street. So you install an MCP on your own Claude in 30 seconds, just like you ask it to connect with your folders or Gmail. So just if you don't have context. One thing I quickly want to touch on, so forgive me if we're going to talk about this later, but I think the other key piece, you're talking about document extraction here, Scott, is, you know, even if you have a closed loop system, I think one of the big challenges that I think everyone is experiencing, or the reality check, even we should say, some might even call it the sort of existential crisis of some of these big LLM companies is the cost to getting to answers, both in compute as well as in cost. In other things, obviously interrelated. So I think the other challenge that we see is, companies even if they extract data or attempt to extract data from technical reports, good example. I mean, forget the process of getting the reports and making sure you have the latest reports. Assume you have all of that. The other really material challenge is the cost of querying that information. Because if you think about what an LLM is, right? I mean, AI is really not a brain. It's an incredible tool that can do incredible things on structured and organized information. Well, it can do it on any information, but it's designed to do it on structured information. So if you think about the difference, and we'll go into this a bit later, but if you think about the difference in asking a 1,000 page or a 500, even 100 page document, the same question, whether it's the same or whether it's, as Scott said, going deeper and deeper to try and get to the same or a different answer, it essentially has to restructure itself every single time to figure out what you're talking about. where if you have a closed loop system where that information's already been extracted or OCR'd out of this data set, and we'll talk about that in a bit, then you really are talking to a piece of information akin to, I mean, simplistically like a big Excel spreadsheet, right? So the compute cost is anything from 100 to 300 times less than if you ask the same question to Claude to a document. And this is every time, right? So this compounds exponentially in terms of the compute you use and therefore the cost of doing, of doing anything. And this is why we regularly speak to clients that easily spend, $500,000, $2,000 a month easily on tokens. And, comparatively using a closed loop system with OCR and extracted data, it's anything from 20 to 100 times cheaper than that, right? It's almost immaterial compared to what most people would be used to when they run out of tokens, which seems to be quite a commonplace at the moment. Anything you want to add on that, Scott, before we move on?
I think, well, the OCR piece, I think, is a pretty big one. Like, um, not just reading the tables and everything, but actually reading the images and what's in behind the images. And a lot of times when you put a large PDF in, the images or the tables are actually read over and it's not really taken in. So, and a lot of those tables contain a lot of the very important information. So, by already having it there, I think it's solving the problem for 50% of the first search.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Alrighty. Okay, so what I want to focus on next then is really what it takes, right? I think this is a key part. We're going to dive a little bit deeper now. I think we've given you some conceptual information here, but I'm going to talk you through as high a level as possible the process that we follow, and also, despite all of this, some of the challenges we still face. So we have internally what we call a multi-source, multi-factor authentication algorithm. It's a mouthful, and that's the first half of the description. Beyond that, we also do deep research, self-correcting AI with agents, and finally, human in the loop. This is a dynamic process that runs in real time on information that we already extract. So, just give you an idea of what that actually means in simple English, right? So, what we do, multi-source, multi-factor authentication. So, multi-source, the information has to come from a credible source, right? So, worst case scenario, you have a single source, therefore, by virtue of that, you can't have multi-source, but you tend to be able to find for almost all the data that we're talking about today anyway, you tend to find multiple sources. So having a trained system in our world, for example, quite obviously, I'm assuming for you as well, it would be the exchange, the company website, filings, any official source of information, CDAR, these are what we would call credible sources. And really, for the purpose of genuine automation, genuine data extraction, ignoring pretty much everything else. That said, though, this is where the multi-factor piece comes in, right? So, for example, we would, in real time, with our algorithms, extract this information from various sources and algorithmically cross-validate it against each other to get to not only the true north number, but also an audit trail of why the number is the number, and also document audit trail of where these numbers sit in each document. So I do really appreciate this is not an amateur endeavor, but as we titled, this is what it takes, right? So we're really giving you exactly how we process information to get to where we are. So that's the multi-source, multi-factor authentication. But then inevitably, you might, especially in your early attempts, you might find there are some discrepancies. Either very often actually human error. So for example, a really good example is very often we find, and I can show you in a second, actually I can show you in probably in real time. So very often we find human error all the time on any form of announcements, right? So what I'm trying to explain here just very quickly is, let's say, for example, you're looking at draw results and you're trying to extract draw results for whatever reason. Look, this is our live platform. We have 3D modeling on everything live, but what I really want to show you is this. So, this is the type of information that's extracted globally and normalized and standardized, right? So, from an extraction perspective, this is a single source because the company has released this on their website. However, this would be an example of multiple sources, right? So, for example, this is ranked by the credibility of the source or the weighting of the source. And this is essentially all the same number. So one, two, three, four, five versions. I mean, for some larger companies, there's like 25 versions of this document. And really, what we're trying to, in this context, this is a very simplistic example because it's just a primary resources number. But this is essentially the most credible source, which is the half-year report, and then it weighs it up against all the other, all the other information we have, which is that multi-factor authentication. Now, when it gets to, so I'll just stop the share again. When it gets to the deep research and self-correcting piece. Now, sometimes a mistake is made by let's say, a geologist or maybe probably more of an IR person or someone that didn't see or doesn't necessarily check everything, or maybe they check everything, but it's such a small nuance. So, for example, on drill hole intercepts, someone might put a minus sign accidentally. So occasionally you model that in 3D with AI and it shows up. It doesn't show down into the ground. So really look simple things like that. And over time, you refine these algorithms to pick these things up, right? And query them. And this is where the deep research beyond the data set comes in to actually just do a logic check or a common sense check. And then that self-correcting AI runs and runs until it, well, actually two loops. I shouldn't say runs and runs, two loops. And then if there's still no contextual explanation for why it doesn't get the number or doesn't understand the number, it actually goes into a human in the loop with pulse intelligence, right? So that is an enormous algorithmic process. Again, granted, this is not a simple thing to do, but from what it really takes to be able to get to true north numbers at scale, which probably isn't your objective, but I think this is we'd like to think the gold standard, certainly that we've been able to figure out so far. So that's also just to, just looking at the time, sorry. That's step one of step two in this particular section. So step two is probably the more meaty bit, right? And this is where the mining industry experience is really required, and as we all have. So, step two, once you have the data and you have it extracted or OCR'd and you've done all of those things correctly, step two is the hard part, the really hard part, right? It's the categorization, the standardization, the normalization of information. So, if you think about different reporting standards, different units of measure, different currency exchanges, coordinates with drill results, for example. So each one of these can essentially create a fatal error downstream and normally does, unless it's normalized or standardized. So again, we're talking about things here from an enterprise perspective. So this is to do it across 25 exchanges and five different reporting standards and countries. So again, this is quite advanced, but this is the challenges that we face on a daily basis. Um, I'm just thinking, I want to give you another example of this just before we move to the next section. So let me just try and share this again. So here's a really good example of what we're trying to show you guys. So I'm going to use I wouldn't call it an edge case, but I want to call it an edge case because it is so mathematically complex. So I think we will all know Nevada gold mine complex, right? So if you think about the complexity to report a single primary metric like mineral resource and reserve data. So Nevada gold mining complex has a lot of complexity, excuse the pun, but firstly, it has four levels of pits and sub-pits, right? So there you go. So that's the first complexity, which means that between Newmont and Barrick, they have different shareholdings on different sections of the complexes. You have royalty companies that only have a royalty on a portion of a single sub-asset, which is three levels down from the main asset. So in order to get AI to work properly, you really do need to engineer this extremely carefully. And this is coming back to that, very simplistic example that I gave about, unless the data is structured and extracted and validated, all of this is essentially just downstream production, right? In terms of being able to understand where the numbers are and to normalize and standardize these numbers for AI to use it in the first place. So again, for example, this is for a primary asset. This is for the entire complex. But if you want to go down, to a sub tenement or asset, you're getting production and you're getting resource and reserves data for this very, very specific nuanced part of the asset. So yeah, hopefully that gives a little bit of visual structure as to the output, and we'll go again a little bit more into the detail on the checklist as to how to at least conceptually get your head around getting there. Scott, anything up next?
I guess I have a question for you. When you're breaking out the assets and applying you know, structured all the royalties across different assets, um, do you think there's balance checks that needs like the AI does if there's like 1% royalty plus another percent royalty, does it then check if they're adding on top of each other or taking away from each other? Is it trying to read royalty agreements and things like that too?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is again, that's a very interesting question. Thanks. So this is where the OCR becomes incredibly important because, as Scott alluded to earlier, extracting a table is technically complex, but it's relatively it's getting more democratized with good OCR and good LLM processing. But unless you extract the entire document, not just the key numbers and metrics, you can't really, well, you can at extreme cost to yourself and extreme error rate, but you can't really answer the question or any question similar to what Scott just asked, because if you've extracted the information, you now have got very very efficient and inexpensive recall to be able to do mathematical calculations or reason or logic-based calculations, right? Because like Scott was saying, like we have AI agents that run our M&A tracking and our company name change tracking and listing and delisting tracking. We have AI agents that run royalties. So those AI agents have been trained and programmed to think one-dimensionally, and it doesn't have to worry about anything else because it knows exactly where the information is. It knows exactly where to find it, and it then can be trained relatively simply, actually, in some cases for relatively simple tasks, which of course can increase with complexity exponentially when you start having to consider, where judgment is required, which is sort of what we call level three. Level one is just binary extraction. Level two is mathematical, which is essentially what Scott just asked, and level three is judgment based. And this is where you got to ask yourself the question: is it the is that something we engineer by prompts, or is that something we just don't do? So, for example, we're not going to give a judgment on, for example, is this asset investable? That'll be a risk in a DD product down the line, but our job is measured, not judged. Our job is not to say to you at this point, buy this asset. And for that reason, we tend to focus on level one and two of the mathematical part, the stuff we can control, beyond the sort of individual judgment piece.
Cool. Well, maybe I'll start off with the next section. So, speaking about why generic AI can't shortcut, when the agents pull the data
Yeah.
from the announcements and stuff like that, do they reconcile it before it goes into Pulse?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's essentially the primary business, to be honest. I mean, it only goes to Pulse once it's gone through this algorithmic verification, and that happens dynamically. And yeah, unless that's validated, it can't get pushed to the front end at all. And actually, it raises a really interesting, very important question around, the AI, needs to know what it doesn't know, and I think this is a catastrophic problem for generic large language models, right? So if you extract it from documentation, there really is no way to know. And I think if you think about the slightly left field, but I mean the technological base is essentially identical. The work we do in geological data digitization, where we digitize 30, 50, 80, 100-year-old documents, Cyrillic drill passports, and I'm sure many people know what that looks like. Documents that you can't read with a naked eye, 20, thousands and thousands of sort of handwritten metrics. And it's all good and well to attempt to OCR that, but unless you have the system in place and the guardrails in place to make absolutely sure that it tells you and highlights where it couldn't understand or it couldn't decipher, it really is a very difficult system to run at scale and with great trust. Again, in a sort of hobbyist way, and building a faster horse, absolutely, but really building a rocket ship, absolutely not. And this is the fundamental difference. I think, AI has given us this not even a perception, but very much an amazing ability to do things faster. But I think our view is you should be able to do things very differently and faster, not just faster, because you're going to hit a limit very, very quickly if you attempt more and more complex tasks, as you probably all are, as we have, and as we are every day.
I think that comes into the next bit I was going to actually speak about is context sealing. So, if a generic AI is given a task, it doesn't really understand the parameters of that task because it really hasn't done it before over and over again. But your dedicated agents do this every day, day in, day out. So they know what good looks like, right?
Mm.
And they have the context of what good looks like. So when it's asked to actually go and run a comp or go run check a full PFS study, it knows what that should look like. But if it's a Claude or if it's a another LLM, it's doing that for the first time every single time.
Yeah, quite right. I mean, it's in a way you need to be as one-dimensional, inch wide, mile deep as possible on any workflow, right? So, to your point, we have an AI agent that only looks at, delistings and listings, only at M&A, only at royalties, and that's only the primary function. I mean, once it starts doing calculations, that's a very different set of systems again, right? So it really is layering these systems to create that structure, so it really can't deviate. And, God forbid it does deviate, it tells you because it doesn't know what or it knows that it physically can't make anything up based on the guardrails that you've put in place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything before I jump into the real world um, one? Is there anything you want to touch on for generic AI?
No, I think I was going to touch on the data integrity protocol, the prompting, but I think this is where you're going to go next anyway. So
Yeah.
yeah, why don't we go
Yeah,
there?
I'll do that. Cool. So this is a prompt that I run daily. Um, and it is built to essentially look for the past 25 hours of all M&A activity. Now, this prompt probably took me an hour to build, and it is a lot of reiterations of asking Claude built into the MCP, um, asking it, is it looking at, say, the most recent documents, or is it looking at 25 days back instead of 25 hours? So by asking all these questions as you build this prompt and then checking the result, you you can then understand if the output is correct or not. And I think when you're building this prompt, you kind of need to understand and know what your end product wants to look like. So then when you're prompting it, you can get there. So I've got everything from defects. I've got things in there, what tickers it should look at, what exchanges it should look at, um, the headlines, the types of words it should look at. For example, M&A, what variance it has. Oh, where else we got? In triad situations, RTOs, JVs, transaction spin out. So using real keywords so it can find them in all the announcements. And maybe we'll in a normal 24-hour period, how many announcements off the top of your head do you know is being processed?
Oh, I mean, anything from in every 24 hours, I think on average is about 675. So 25 hours, I mean, let's call it 700. Yeah.
Yeah. So then it's checking all those documents, it's checking the word counts. As you can see, I think this prompt is about 3,000 words.
Yeah. Scott, can I just interrupt for a sec? Sorry. Just for everyone here sitting here going, well, how the hell am I supposed to do this? This looks like software engineering. Um, let me reassure you. I mean, Scott is, of course, an advanced user, but I'm not sure if you've tried this yourself. Many of you would have anyway. Again, Scott is way beyond me with this level of skill, but I do it myself as well. You actually ask Claude to write the prompts for you, right? And you can do that in
That's
natural
correct.
language. So you don't have to sit and type this out and try and figure these things out. I mean, Claude is incredibly powerful. And this is a structure that can or that has been developed by AI based on Scott's iteration, right? And you can literally initially get your structure maybe to 60 or 70, maybe even 80%, If it's not that complex, maybe to 95% just with the natural language. And then Claude will structure this for you. But I'm not sure if you picked this piece up as well, but this particular piece of information, this prompt is run daily against Pulse Intelligence. So this doesn't go into the whole wide universe of Claude or of the world and try and figure it out every time. It'll basically bankrupt you, and you really will not get the best results unless you give it very specific sources. And then again, unless this data has been extracted and validated, you're going to run into the same problems. So really what this does is it goes into the Pulse corpus, the database, our categorized ontology or whatever big words you want to use, and it just extracts information that's already been extracted from documents and already been tagged and validated. So not only is it almost instantaneous, but it's also negligible from a cost perspective, and it's consistent and accurate. Sorry.
Yeah, no, all good. And going back to, building out this prompt, the first prompt I actually started with is check the last 25 hours across all exchanges and produce me a structured Excel report. So that's what I actually start with. And an hour later, I get to this detailed prompt. I'm just going to stop sharing this and then I'll open up another screen as I upload the prompt to Claude. As you can see, it can also tell that it's midnight here, so it's calling me a night owl. So it's going to read the prompt, and what we'll do, we'll probably spend 2 minutes, and you can actually see it working on this. Sometimes it will ask to access Pulse MCP or not. It just depends if I've already used it on the day.
Yeah, and now you can start seeing all these hard-coded boxes appearing, which is now direct data calls from the Pulse MCP or from whatever spreadsheet or database that you might use.
As you can see, that this is where it's connected to the Pulse MCP. Probably give it another minute or so, and then I ran one about an hour ago. Now the one for today won't be as big as a Tuesday or a Wednesday, just because it's only really had the ASX and some of the London listed markets and Asia. So a 25-hour period on a Tuesday to Friday would contain much more.
Yeah. So just as a final thought, while this is running, obviously this is a relatively simplistic example, but what we do, for example, for clients or what we help set up for clients is this level of sophistication, but on much more complex comps and benchmarking, right? Or on BD or portfolio monitoring, or I mean, literally anything you can imagine. But from a quantitative perspective, for example, if you want to run comps with 20 different metrics directly into whatever AI you use, your own AI, whatever documents you use, this is really coming back to that, what does it take to be able to do that at the level that would be acceptable to use professionally and on a augmented or automated basis? This is really where it sits. So we have this type of functionality mirrored on the platform as well, including like a prompt builder or skill builder. And actually, while this is running, Scott, maybe we can also talk about because that's the piece that I didn't say forgot to mention a second ago. I was talking about the algorithmic extraction and the validation, the categorization, the standardization. This is, as far as we know, pretty cutting edge and frontier stuff, and the results we're getting is fantastic. But despite all of those things, when you use Claude MCP and you don't add essentially prompting and data integrity protocols, the risk it then runs, which is kind of obvious in hindsight, but the risk it then runs is which field does it query? If I mean we have 97 different fields for reserves and resources based on all the normalization and standardization we do. So there's always a risk unless you tell it to do the same thing every time that it just goes rogue sometimes. And if it goes rogue on one field in a complex comp, the thing's essentially worthless, right? So we really had to think this through, and Scott came up with some pretty remarkable ways to solve this. And again, this maybe we can talk about this now quickly, Scott. This the data
Yep.
integrity protocol, because again, this seems like sort of space age coding, but we this is on the platform. We give this to all of our clients, so it's just it's just plugged into how you use Claude. You upload it to your own Claude, and it's essentially, I mean, you wrote it, Scott, so maybe you can explain better than me what it actually does beyond everything we've already discussed.
Yeah, so I think I got to a stage where I was actually working through a project myself, and it was, reading a document from 2004 instead of 2014. So I think I got to a stage where it needs to make sure it's checking the most relevant documents and the documents that have been posted by the companies. It needs to triple check currency. So just going through line by line and reconciling all those numbers. Um, and then at the end of before it provides me a report, essentially having a checklist, it can go through itself. And if it doesn't meet that checklist, it actually asks me and tells me, well, it hasn't done the right thing. Do you want me to go back and recheck it? So it essentially doesn't allow it to move to the next step without me authorizing it to do so.
Is it fair to call it almost an insurance policy? Because much of
It,
what it asks has already been done, but it checks for things like recency, for example. In the unlikely event that there's been a news release, either in minutes or some document that hasn't been processed automatically, it then goes and checks everything again just to make absolutely sure.
yeah, and another example is it could have pulled out a marketing document instead of an official finance document. So it checks all those things too to make sure it's using the most official document from the company.
Cool.
Um,
All right.
Let me just pull up the M&A one quickly and just show you the output. Oh, where's my? Oh, here we go. So um, bear in mind, so this will be so this is branded because I in the back of my Claude I've kind of got my colors and everything like that. But essentially, this is for today what's happened across the Asian markets and some of the US markets and the ASX. So it's produced a high level executive report for me, and it numbers that and it tells me what's going on. Um, but then also, as I've just hide this, it will go line by line, acquisition, headline, what the consideration is, the deal term structures, and it will do that across all the exchanges for the last 25 hours, and it will summarize it all for me. So I use this every day in the morning. I just upload that prompt. 10 minutes later, it just gives me this structured Excel file. And
I
as
saw
we were
source
saying,
links there as well, if I'm not mistaken. Did you have that as well? Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. No, thanks for that. I'm just conscious of the time. We're running 4 or 5 minutes behind. Do you want to show anything else in a minute or so, and I can quickly go to the next section before we open up for Q&A?
I think that's probably the main thing there. Oh, take me, but yeah, as we were saying, and actually going back to the data integrity piece, it actually gives me the official listing from the exchange, so I can then check if everything's correct. So
All
yeah,
right. Excellent. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to just share one screen. Alex, I'm not sure if we can email this to everyone that registered or people can screenshot or how we're going to do this, but we will share this with everybody. We have the recording shared, obviously, as well. But just from a summarization perspective, we'll share this with everybody that's interested as well. I mean, this is fundamentally just to sort of pretty much round up before we get to Q&A, what do you need to ask before you trust a number? So whether it's whatever you do, right? It doesn't have to be in a strict professional context, but from an AI perspective, where did it come from? Like, what is the context? when is it from, of course, the date, figuring out some kind of system of record. Currency and entity, very important from, of course, a comps and benchmarking perspective. Reconciled or retrieved. This is a little bit more challenging to do, but you need to at least know what you know or you don't know. I think that's critical with AI, and that probably solves half of people's problems, just being able to know. I think it's sort of we have this curious problem where people say, everyone knows that S&P, have maybe like, 60, 70% of data is updated relatively recently, and very often things are not right. But, you need to be able to go very quickly to where this information is and see it. And people have this perception that AI should be 100% right, right? And it really, if you look at what you have at the moment versus that, it's completely unreasonable, the expectation. But if it's 98 or 96 or 50, it doesn't really matter in this context. The context is, do you know what's wrong? I think that's the key part here. And ideally, it's as automated as possible. Did the model have room to finish? I mean, if you're a great example. So we were extracting data for one of the top five global royalty companies because we do all sorts of workflow automation for them, and just extracting mineral resource data, for example, from large documents. I mean, just trying to extract their assets. This is as simple as it is. Extract 300 assets from an asset handbook. No amount of AI prompting will let you do that with Claude. It just doesn't work. Like it gives up. So this is a very, very important piece. Again, knowing what you don't know. So this is a big challenge for generic LLMs. Where did it stop in the document? Because we have a pretty advanced way of doing things, and when we use LLMs generically, it bombs out almost on every single query over about 200 pages. Consistency, crucial. Again, this is something that I know a lot of analysts have struggled with and are very good at doing anyway. So I think this is where you have an advantage if you have a good data feed that isn't as advanced, perhaps, as one that already reconciles information, providing the first four or five of the points above is true. Could you defend it in a meeting? I think this is critical. I mean, you look at some of these big four companies that that get caught out, using AI. Not only that, getting it wrong and not even knowing that it's wrong. So I think it's very important to be able to know what you have, and really never ever trust it unless you've validated it or have a system of record to validate it. And then the
I think
cost, I
that's.
think. Sorry, was
I
that?
was just going to say that's key when having the direct links so you can quickly check if needed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crucial. Yeah, I mean, it's when we started the company, we surveyed a lot of people I used to work with. So we did 120 mining finance execs, private equity funds, sovereign wealth funds, investment banking, the works in the mining industry. And then you can download this report. It's called Chaos to Clarity if you haven't read it. And up to 17 weeks per year is lost just trying to find information, right? Across all levels in the organization. And that goes up to essentially 50% of your time as an analyst. Now, this was 2 years ago, so AI probably have reduced that quite a bit. But again, it's that difference between a faster horse or a rocket ship, right? So, and I think generic LLMs give you this perception. Well, again, sorry, I've said this before. It's more than a perception. It's very real. Your horse is going faster, but if you're competing against something that's got a combustion engine, you really have no chance. And I think this is the big challenge most people have. It's this perception of improvement, right? But you're comparing it to how you used to work, not what's out there available. And then the cost piece we've covered, so I'm not going to go into that again. But again, you may or may not be aware of this, but you can ask your own Claude, right? If you work with any third-party MCP or data in the same context window, you can ask Claude to do a query with it, and you can ask Claude to do a query without it, and you can ask it to report on compute and estimated cost, and it gives you an incredible information to be able to compare just how expensive things are or how efficient things are, and you can do that on anything. I'm not sure if you knew that. Okay, I think that wraps us up. So we've gone a few minutes over, but and thank you everyone to have taken the time. I really hope you got some value from this. I know we covered a lot, so please digest this in your own time. Ask us anything separately in a follow-up, and we'd endeavor to to help you uncover or answer any questions you might have. All
Thanks,
right.
everyone. Thanks,
Thank
Paul.
you. Thanks. Bye.